What's going on, everybody? It's your boy Zamboni. I am an herbalist and astrologer. I've been living in Guardia de Osa, the Ocean Forest Eco Lodge in Costa Rica for a little while. I want to send a big shout out to Stormie Grace for inviting me to participate in her YouTube Academy. She invited me to teach Jupiter and Saturn as they as I read them in my practice, and so I'm really grateful for the opportunity to be here and very excited. So we're going to talk about Jupiter and Saturn, and we're going to go through the signs, and we're going to talk about retrogrades, and just sort of like a basic introduction on how to read charts with Jupiter and Saturn in there. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get the thing started. Thank you all so much for being here. Let's go. So then, have the wrong page queued up, but we're almost there. Perfect. Ta-da! All right. So here we go then. Yes, Jupiter and Saturn. So I've called it the daytime squad here, and this is for a couple of reasons. So so Jupiter and Saturn can be thought of as a pair, and they are they are Jupiter is the greater benefic and Saturn is the greater malefic. And in Hellenistic astrology, I suppose we can just jump right on in there. Let's go ahead and just do it. So in Hellenistic astrology, then these two are considered to be the daytime sect, which is to say that they so this concept of sect is thought of as like a political faction. So they when it's daytime out, which is to say that the sun is above the horizon, right? We're not talking about AM PM. We're talking about when the sun is above the horizon, it's light outside. You know what day is, and then versus when it's nighttime, when the sun is below the horizon and it's dark outside. That's what night is, right? So like super simple concept. When it's daytime out, then the sun is stronger than in a night chart, and Jupiter is more benefic. Jupiter is thought of as the most good planet in a chart in a daytime chart, and then Saturn is also of the sect in favor, and so is going to be a little bit more agreeable, or maybe a little more on the constructive side of things as far as Saturn stuff is concerned. So we're thinking of Saturn as the greater malefic. So we're looking at challenges, difficulties, problems anytime with a malefic. But when Saturn is of the sect in favor, which is it's a little bit like if Saturn is a part of a political faction and that faction has power. So this is like currently in office right now, right? And so it's a little bit like we can expect Saturn to just be a little bit more agreeable, to sort of bring things that are helpful, or that are this can be thought of more as like constructive or helpful challenges versus some of the more difficult things that can happen when they are out of favor. So like Mars in a day chart, for example, will cause some of the more difficult and problematic things that can show up in a person's life, because during the daytime, Mars is out of sect, or is in the sect which is out of favor, not in favor. And so this is true also with the opposite. So when it's nighttime out, then Saturn is going to be thought of as like the most bad or the most negative planet in the chart. It's the one that's going to cause most of the problems that are sort of they not insurmountable necessarily, but they suck more. And there's a sense of it just like this just kind of sucks. And then Jupiter is still a benefic, right? And so wants to bring you good stuff, wants to bring you things that you like, but it's Jupiter's influence is a little bit more moderate in a night chart than in a day chart. Jupiter in a day chart is like the best thing out here since sliced bread, whereas Jupiter in a night chart is like cool, like still bringing you stuff you like. It's cute. It's just not as outstanding the way that Jupiter in a day chart is. So this is sort of like a nice way to begin to think about Jupiter and Saturn kind of globally. They do well in a day chart, and they're just kind of like Saturn especially is more difficult in a night chart, and is thought of in this way. Now Jupiter and Saturn are a sort of so this is a nice way to sort of begin, right, to think about them, especially as a way of grouping them. Now, another thing that's very important to remember with Jupiter and Saturn is that we're getting away from the sun at this point. So, so we're at planets that are on the other side of the Earth, right? So if we're thinking about it, goes Sun and then Mercury and then Venus and then Earth, right? So everything on the other side of that is going to be, where things are going to behave differently than than the inner planets do. And so we might think about, um, let's go real quick to the retrograde cycle, and let's just think with that for a little bit. So anything out on the other side of the Earth from the sun, we're going to start to see things like, for example, the retrograde cycle is going to happen on the opposition. So, so when if you ever see the sun and it's opposite to Mars, or opposite to Jupiter, or opposite to Saturn, or anything further than that, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, anything on the other side there, if it's opposite to that planet, then you know that it's retrograde. That's just what an opposition to that planet is. And so as we start to think with this, then this is a good way to sort of like remember sort of like how the rules are so very different. If we're looking at, we're looking at Mercury and Venus. Those are kind of like the most potent retrogrades that we can have. Venus is the least common of all the retrogrades. It happens one time every 18 months or something like this. It's a long time for Venus to go in between retrogrades. Mercury is not a long time in between retrogrades. Mercury spends a fair amount of time doing this back and forth and back cycle, right? That's what Mercury does. But there's a very intense kind of focus period during that Mercury retrograde. We can expect, the basic significations of Mercury and Venus kind of get turned on their heads when we start to talk about retrogrades, because they're so like Venus wants to sort of like bring things together and talk about harmony and accord and things of this nature, whereas Venus retrograde can sometimes bring about discord or antithesis of some sort, And so or Mercury wants to be associated with communication. Mercury retrograde will be associated with miscommunication, right? So that like these kinds of things are what happens on the inner level. Now, once we get onto the other side of the Earth, so Mars is here, and Mars does a pretty quick, or does a pretty sort of like the retrograde sort of follows the model of Mercury and Venus in that it happens a fairly pointed area or time frame, and then we can also see how it's a very sort of intense period during this time. Moving on past Mars, then once we get into Jupiter and Saturn, now we're talking about cycles that are much, much longer in the first place, right? So Mars takes about 2 years to go around the zodiac, and that's pretty long relative to the Sun or Venus or Mercury, which do the whole cycle in 1 year. But then to see, so Mars, start is it still takes a little while. It's like a little bit slower than Mercury and Venus, but it's nowhere near the amount of time that it takes Jupiter to get around. Jupiter takes 12 years to make it around the whole zodiac. So we're talking about 1 year per sign. This is a very long time. Mars, for example, is the next slowest after that. Mars takes 2 months in a sign on average, maybe even 6 weeks or so. So this is like, it's just much longer once we get to Jupiter, and then Saturn beyond that. Saturn takes 30 years to get around the zodiac. And so we're looking at cycles that are a much longer period of time. This is important for a couple of reasons. In the first place, this is important when we're looking at a chart and we're trying to time things, and we're looking at transits, for example, or we're engaging with, maybe we're looking at planetary periods, or any of this kind of thing. Then we're looking at, when we're looking at the greater malefic or benefic, then we're looking at periods of time that take a long time. We tend to think of this period of time more as a phase than an event, right? So Jupiter being in a sign, Jupiter is going to be in a sign all year. And so we can more easily think of that as a phase of life rather than like a particular event, the way that, so Venus being in a sign, we're looking at like 3 weeks here. It's just not the same kind of stuff. So we're looking at sort of like larger, more sweeping kind of stuff in general when we're looking at the greater planets. Um, and this is true about, this is part of the reason why we want to call them the greater benefic and the greater malefic, right? So Jupiter, for example, is the greater benefic. It's going to be the one that has to do with sort of like bigger scale, nice things. Quickly, when I say the word benefic, what I'm talking about here is, so this translates to do-gooder or a doer of good. This means, it doesn't necessarily mean, this is not about morality and ethics. So this is not about doing the right thing in the world. That's between you and your deity of choice. Really, this term refers much more to things that a person likes. So when a benefic is involved, then typically things go smoothly. We can typically think about growth. We can think about harmony or togetherness of some sort. We can think about abundance, or we can think about being well nourished or rested, or things being pleasurable in some way, right? What we're looking at here is people like it versus malefics, which translates to evildoers. So again, we're not talking about moral or ethic evil. We're talking instead about things that are uncomfortable or that people don't like. We're looking at challenges or difficulties. We're looking at delays a lot of times. We're looking at inflammation or problems of some sort. And so yes, when we're thinking about greater malevolence or greater beneficence, then what we're looking at here is kind of the big stuff. We can think about Jupiter being the greater benefic, and sort of having to do with abundance and wisdom. A lot of times Jupiter will be associated with spiritual concerns or things of this nature, as opposed to Venus, who is the lesser benefic, and is going to be more concerned with like things like bodily pleasure, or some of the kind of more fleeting, maybe emotional or feeling states. We get less into things like wisdom or clarity or something like this, and get more into hugs when it comes to Venus. So that's the difference between greater and lesser. If we're thinking Saturn versus Mars, Saturn is the greater benefic or malefic, and Mars is the lesser malefic, then we can think about chronic versus acute problems. We can think about Saturn as having to do with longer term sort of stuff, which makes sense because of Saturn's longer cycle as well, right? We can think about chronic problems. We can think about how things can sort of be difficult for a period of time, or we can see some delays here. This, which is greater maleficence versus the more acute, inflamed, ragey kind of way that Mars tends to interact here. A lot of times when we are thinking about Mars, there will be like a fight or a conflict or something like that. And if you've ever been in a fight, then you will know that that shit happens quick. Even a long fight doesn't take that long, really. And so it's really, we're looking at much more of an acute experience with a lesser benefic or malefic versus a more chronic or longer term sort of situation when it comes to the greater malefic and benefic. So this is something sort of to just keep in mind as we are working with Jupiter and Saturn generally. And we're looking at like so we've got a couple of things that we can look at so far. We can look at sect to see if this person was born in the daytime or the nighttime, and make an assessment, a value judgment about Jupiter or Saturn in that moment. Like if we're looking at Saturn in a night chart, then we can be like, okay, this is going to be a little rough. Or if we're looking at Saturn in a day chart, then we can be like, okay, well, this there might be some trouble or some problems or some challenges in this area, but they will likely be surmountable problems, and that they'll they'll sort of edify the person a little bit more in that kind of way. Something to think about here. Now, so speaking on these longer cycles are possible because these planets are on the other side of the Earth from the sun. And so what we're looking at here is much longer cycles, and we're looking at a way of behaving that is just much different from the personal planets, the inner planets. Things just like look real different. So once we start looking at retrogrades and things of this nature, then so so these planets, Jupiter and Saturn, they end up spending about a third of total time retrograde, which is a lot of time. Where it's like 120 days out of the year or something like this that these planets will spend retrograde, and it's so much time that it becomes a little bit a wash to try to talk about the like differences in a nativity. And the we can see Mercury retrograde being a much louder influence than Jupiter retrograde in a chart. This is just like, if we see Mercury retrograde in somebody's chart, that immediately shows an emphasis on that Mercury in whatever Mercury rules and these kinds of things. Whereas Jupiter retrograde doesn't really. It's like it's just kind of it's very common, and like it just isn't that big a deal. Now, this is specifically in natal astrology, right? These kinds of things become much more relevant in a horary context, or looking at electional astrology. What we're if we're looking at electional astrology and we want to elect for Jupiter or something like this, then Jupiter retrograde is not going to give you the same kind of beautiful benefic result that you're looking for, the same way that Jupiter direct will show up with. One thing to think about is that retrogrades can sort of indicate delays of some sort, or taking an oblique path of some sort. Like we're looking at sort of like things moving around and like coming in the back way, or taking an unorthodox route to manifestation of some kind of way. Now, of course, if we're thinking about Saturn, Saturn already indicates delay, and so is it a delayed delay, like extra slow? Like kinda. It's just like not so big a deal when it comes to these kind of planets. The way that like a Venus retrograde is a big deal, you're not going to get around talking about a Venus retrograde in a chart. So then, this is something to sort of bear in mind while if we're ever looking at a chart, then this is something to sort of and we're trying to assess somebody's nativity. We'll look at retrogrades as one way to get an idea of what's going on with this planet, and assessing the condition of the planet overall. But as far as retrogrades are concerned, with Jupiter and Saturn specifically, that is one of many things that we'll want to consider, but definitely not at the top of the list. Not the same way that like sign rulership would be, or aspects, or hard aspects, or any of this kind of thing. And this is a nice difference to think about with Mercury or Venus or Mars retrograde in a chart. So then let's talk about these planets. And so we'll do a broad overview here of just Jupiter in general and Saturn in general, and then we'll sort of speak to these planets in signs, all right? So then, Jupiter is the greater benefic. I mentioned that for a little while. Jupiter's job in a chart is to say yes to stuff, to affirm things, to bring power and opportunity, and Jupiter tends to make things bigger. Jupiter is the big planet, right? we can think about Jupiter as being really excited and excitable. Jupiter is the one who would be the king were it not for the sun, right? It's very big and has an enormous gravitational pull. There's something here that is really, and when I think about an enormous gravitational pull, I can sometimes think about like wisdom or followers or things like this. A lot of times, Jupiter figures will be religious figures of some sort. Some kind of spirituality will show up in some kind of way. Um, Jupiter is often associated with eagles as well, and and these are a creature which is often associated with spirituality. The idea of flying or soaring above the rest, or these kinds of things. Maybe we can say something about an eagle eye and having a sort of like discerning attitude about things, or any of that sort of stuff. Being able to see what's really real, speaking to truth a lot of times, truth, justice, all that sort of stuff. We can think about how Jupiter is associated with the Hierophant card in the tarot, in the Rider-Waite-Smith tarot, at least. And so this is, the Hierophant is pictured as a pope or a religious leader of some sort who has some parishioners there bowing down before him. And so, and this is very much how Jupiter likes to operate. There's this kind of wisdom or teaching that will show up with Jupiter a lot of times. A lot of times, definitely get a teacher with Jupiter. Jupiter is good at doing the thing and wants you to be as well. So there's definitely something that is affirmational when it comes to Jupiter. Jupiter wants to say yes to things, and depending on Jupiter's condition, will do that. So people who have a very strong Jupiter will often say yes to stuff. They will be people who are ready to go on adventures, or to who have a kind of like a strong Jupiter in a chart will usually have a kind of buoyant or optimistic or positive attitude about things. Like there's something here that really like feels like it's going to be okay, and we can think about that as being evidence of things largely being okay for that person in their life, right? They're not somebody who is super concerned about security or something like this. Jupiter is not super concerned about security because it thinks it's going to be okay. And so this is going to be, if somebody who has a super strong Jupiter, we can talk about them as being lucky or fortunate in some kind of way, right? And a lot of times this will show up as they're not super concerned about stuff because they have this inherent idea that things are going to be okay no matter what happens. Jupiter is the greater benefic, and so speaks to wisdom, or any of these kind of meaning is one of the ones that really shows up a lot with Jupiter, and sort of like following a meaningful path, or things like having a sort of like connection to maybe higher powers or the unseen in some kind of way. That'll show up with Jupiter a lot of times. And so if we're looking at Jupiter in a chart, then Jupiter is going to rule two houses, right? Jupiter rules Sagittarius and it rules Pisces. And so if we're ever looking to figure out what's going on with Jupiter, then we'll want to see what, we'll look at Jupiter's condition, and then that will give us information about the houses that Sagittarius and Pisces occupy. And so that's just something to sort of like think with and bear in mind. Saturn, on the other hand, Saturn is the greater malefic, right? So here we've got an evildoer, we've got somebody who causes problems. Saturn is typically associated with time or inevitability in some way. Saturn is often associated with death itself. We can think about I've heard Saturn referred to as the goat god of death before. Here we can see the Grim Reaper is pictured. Saturn is frequently pictured with a scythe or some kind of like reaping device. It looks really rough there whenever Saturn is around. Saturn also is very slow. Saturn moves very slowly in a chart, or through the zodiac. And so that slowness is often associated with slowness in this life in some kind of way. So this can look like stillness or stopping of some sort, rest as well. We can also think about things like, just we can think about, so Saturn takes a long time to go around the zodiac, right? So that means that Saturn, is going to really come into maturity in a much slower fashion than any of the other planets. Jupiter is going to go around 2 times before Saturn has completed one revolution, right? And so this is, we can see here an association with slowness or with elders or with old people. Now, again, we can think about elders being associated with slowness as well, right? They're getting old. Maybe their knees don't work too good anymore. Also, Saturn will be often associated with leg injuries of some sort. Saturn is often pictured on crutches or ill, a leper or something like this. Saturn is often pictured this way. So one of the things that I really like to think about with Saturn is when I'm sort of like trying to brainstorm Saturn words, then there are, ST shows up with Saturn, right? Even the glyph for Saturn looks a little bit like an ST. Should have put a picture of that, didn't. You can find the glyph of Saturn. You know what this is already though. So we get this like Saturn here, right? And so we can think about stillness, or we can think about stasis, or we can think about stopping or rest or consistency or constant, any of these kinds of things. What we're looking for here is the theme of reliability, or the theme of sameness of some sort, or the theme of maybe being stopped or still or not moving in some kind of way. Saturn will often refer to inaction in order to sort of like see what's going on here. There's like nothing happening in this area of life, and it feels like it's like nothing will ever happen here sometimes because of the amount of time that it takes. It feels like it's taking forever, and it feels like it's never going to end. So, and then this can be a source of fear for people as well. So we can take a look at where Saturn is in the chart. We can look at the house that Saturn is located in and get an idea as to what kind of fears sort of like resonate very strongly with a person. If a person has Saturn in the 7th, for example, then we might see somebody who is afraid around whatever their relationship situation is. Maybe it takes them a long time to get into a partnership or something like this. Saturn in the 7th or ruling the 7th might look like, like the person doesn't find an appropriate partner until after the Saturn return, or something until after the person has become a mature adult, and or so that's then something that we can do with all the houses, right? So that Saturn in the 10th, like the person doesn't find a particular or an appropriate career or job until after the Saturn return, or until reaching maturity, or whatever. Like insert your house um, words or keywords here, right? Insert your house keywords and sort of talk about how slow it can be to come to maturity in that area. So we can see some like late blooming here, or delays, and then that can then go on to generate fear in a person as well. So we might be able to find somebody who like has anxiety or fear around whatever thing, especially since it looks like it's not really going anywhere in their life, and they can sort of start to sweat that at a certain point. So these are the things that we're going to want to sort of look at in a chart in order to get an idea of how to read for Saturn and Jupiter. So now let's go ahead and go through the signs here. So what we're going to do is we're going to start at Cancer, because Cancer is the rising sign of the Thema Mundi. It is also considered to be the beginning of the year in the ancient Egyptian calendars, because that is when the sun is in Cancer, then that's when the Nile floods. I feel like there's never really a good like beginning place for a perfect circle, and so you can really start anywhere you like. And so I tend to like starting with Cancer, partially because it makes Aries so grumpy. and I'm into that. So we're going to start with Cancer because I'm teaching this. So Jupiter in Cancer. Now this is a fun placement. This is one of the ones where Jupiter is in excellent condition here. This is called exaltation. When a planet is exalted, then it is in a sign that it does well in. It can be thought of, so exaltation means like pushed up or up on high or something like this, in an especially high position. And so we can do extra good things here. Now, Jupiter doesn't rule Cancer. That's very important to exaltation. Jupiter is not in domicile and is therefore not in charge of things, right? But it can be thought of as maybe something like an honored guest or something like this. One of my favorite ways to think about exaltation is when you were a kid and you went over your friend's house and that friend just had the hookup. They had the super sweet couches and the nice toys and the like all the freshest clothes, and the mom was hooking up the snacks and all. Like, I don't live here, but I love it here. It's so much fun. This is the way that a planet feels when it's in exaltation. And so in Cancer, Jupiter is in the domicile of the moon, but is in excellent position and loves it here. So we can think here a little bit about the way that Jupiter and the moon are related or similar and what kind of things they can agree on. Well, so when it comes to the moon really wants to make sure that people are well fed, that people are eating. The moon really wants to make sure that things are nourished and nurtured and well taken care of. Jupiter really wants things to grow. Jupiter loves a certain amount of abundance and like a sense of like, this is going to be great. I feel really good and excited, and I feel like it's all possible. Now, these things work very well together. If we're looking toward nourishment or being taken care of or something like this, then Jupiter is in Jupiter in this kind of position, feeling well nurtured or well taken care of or something like this. This I often like to think of as being a little bit like a greenhouse. There's something which is like it's possible to grow stuff in a greenhouse, which it's not possible to grow outside of the greenhouse in many places, right? You can maybe grow tropical fruits in a greenhouse that would not survive the frost were it not for the greenhouse here, right? So we can see how there's a kind of robustness here that is very exciting to Jupiter in Cancer. One of the things that a, a strong Jupiter position will often connote is there's something here about like there's something here about like doing the most or like being aware of how lucky or fortunate or wise this person is. Like I know that I have great ideas, and so I don't feel any kind of way about telling the world about my great ideas. Now, sometimes this is excellent, and you've got great ideas, and so put them out there. Other times, this can be annoying to people who, you know, the Jupiter in Cancer is a little bit like, don't hate me because you ain't me. But like other people may sometimes be annoyed by this. Like Jupiter in a very strong position has very strong opinions about stuff and thinks that they're right. And maybe they are, but like even still, this can be like a little much sometimes and can be a little bit kind of, it just can be kind of hard to listen to or deal with sometimes. So that's just, Jupiter in a really nice position like this is very lucky and wants to do the best things and thinks that it's all possible. And a lot of times it will be. You'll also want to take a look at the condition of the moon because the moon is ruling this area, right? So Jupiter is not in its own place in Cancer. And so we'll always want to look at what's going on with the moon. So if the moon is like besieged by Saturn and Mars or something like this, then Jupiter in Cancer isn't going to give you your most delicious, mangoes or whatever from the greenhouse. You're always gonna have to take a look at the condition of the moon or whatever your ruling planet is. You always need to take that condition into account in order to understand what's really going on with this Jupiter. But assuming that the moon is in middling or better condition, then Jupiter in Cancer is pretty lucky. This is a nice placement. You can get a lot out of a placement like this. You can really sort of like make things go and make things grow and make things sort of exciting to other people. We can see the a kind of like contagious excitement here. So Jupiter in Cancer, this is a fun one. Um, yeah. Moving on to Saturn in Cancer. So I like this one. I like this image here because it's we can still see the greenhouse, right? But the whole shit is just a little more drab. So which is what Saturn is and does. Saturn is very bland with the way that it operates. So Saturn is actually in what is sometimes called detriment or exile in Cancer. Saturn rules Capricorn, which is opposite to Cancer. And so when Saturn is in Cancer, then Saturn is as far away from home as possible. Now, this makes a little bit of sense, right? This is the domicile of the moon. And so the moon is super changing all the time, right? The moon is like always growing to fullness, or maybe it's waning back to newness or to darkness. It moves through the signs of the zodiac super quickly. Saturn takes about 28 to 30 years to go through a cycle of the zodiac. The moon does that same cycle in about 28 days. And so there's something here that is like they're very opposite to one another. So Saturn being in Cancer can be a little bit, if we're thinking about Saturn as structure or boundary, or we can think about walls a lot of time, then the greenhouse analogy still stands up really well. If we've got a greenhouse which is made out of glass, then this is really good for doing greenhouse stuff, right? For making sure that things are sort of well taken care of on the inside. But this is not very good if what you need is walls. If you need walls and you need good, strong structures and security and stuff like that, then glass is not the move. It's not what you want, right? It's transparent. You can see right through it. There's no security there. It's very easy to break, and can come down in a storm or something like this, right? And so this is not the sort of brick house that Saturn likes to build. This kind of thing, I've seen this before. I've seen Saturn in Cancer before as looking a little bit like, there's like a little bit of a maybe mama's boy kind of situation or something like this. Saturn in Cancer doesn't really develop a super tough or thick skin. Saturn in Cancer is actually a little more on the kind of it needs the Cancer placements need hugs a lot of times. And so Saturn is a little bit grumpy in this position and can sometimes be, Saturn is grumpy sort of generally. And then to be in Cancer is to be a little bit more kind of just like having a difficult time with things, especially as the emotions are concerned. And now, again, you want to pay attention to the condition of the moon, because maybe the moon is in an excellent position and can see Saturn from this, maybe we've got the moon in Pisces conjunct Jupiter or something like that, making an overcoming trine to Saturn or something like that, right? So there are mitigating conditions which can sort of like help Saturn out. But in general, we're not going to be looking at toughness here. We're going to be looking at kind of like feeling soft and like, there being a sense of like, when it comes to Saturn, we're looking at discipline and maturity and things of this nature. And Saturn in Cancer, it lacks backbone a lot of time. It lacks that super like strong, reliable, resilient, resistant kind of situation. Whew, look at that time. All right, I got to move much faster than this. Okay, so Jupiter, moving on, Jupiter in Leo. Let's talk about Jupiter in Leo. So Jupiter and the sun get along. I mentioned before that Jupiter would be the king were it not for the sun. The sun is not threatened by that, and they just a couple of cool guys who like hanging out together. They have fun. It feels like royalty. The image that I chose here is the Six of Wands from the Rider-Waite-Smith tarot deck. The reason I did that is because this card refers specifically to Jupiter and Leo. Jupiter has rules a decan of Leo based on one of the methods of calculation. It's so Jupiter and Leo is there's this card is often associated with victory, or we can see a character here who is like crowned in laurels, and it might be like returning from battle, having won the battle, right? And so there's something here that feels very victorious. It feels very there. This is a placement that can be very excited about itself in some kind of way. Leo, in particular, is a sign that cares a lot about itself, and there's a like self-expression is a very big deal to Leo, and these all of these kinds of things. So Jupiter in this position can maybe be self-healing in some kind of way. If Jupiter is associated with healing and Leo is associated with self, then we might see some kind of self-healing that wants to go on here, or this kind of resoluteness of kind of like I can do it because I can do it because I can do stuff. There's a self-confidence here that is a big deal. That self-confidence, of course, can turn into self-importance pretty quickly and easily. And so, again, anytime Jupiter is comfortable, then we're going to be seeing things like that want to push in that direction. That'll be a little bit like a little bit much, or we can. One of the ways that I like to think about Jupiter Sun together is like it's really good for like making merry, but it's really it can like it can do too much sometimes. We can see things like overspending or overindulgence of some sort if like Jupiter and the Sun are in aspect to each other or something like this. And so Jupiter in Leo sort of suffers from this problem as well. There's a real bigness, a kind of like here I am, and so we can do this now, which can be super exciting, and there's a comfort and confidence in that, which is very helpful in a person's life. But at the same time, it can be a little bit much, especially when looking in from the outside. So then we can move on to Saturn in Leo here. So Saturn in Leo so again, we're looking at exile. So Saturn rules Aquarius, which is opposite to Leo. And so again, we're in a position where Saturn is as far from home as possible. And that is a position which can be kind of difficult for Saturn sometimes. There's a kind of rigidness to Saturn and Leo. So we can think about Saturn as being rigid or structured or stable, and then Leo as being a fixed sign. It's a fixed fire sign, right? And so the fire of Saturn can sometimes turn into like it can be like extra grumpy or a little bit ragey or something like this. But there's also this like stability that comes with a fixed sign that can turn a little bit rigid or brittle with Saturn and Leo. Saturn and Leo really cares a lot about authority and prefers to be the authority itself. That's part of the reason why I chose a German Shepherd here as the image for Saturn and Leo. So Saturn and Leo, or a German Shepherd, really is a strong, aggressive dog which cares very much about the hierarchy and the maintenance of structures, and is happy to depose your authority if you don't look like a real leader in that dog's eyes. Like the way that hierarchy is structured is super important to this creature, and if you are not shaping up and looking like a strong man sort of leader, then Saturn and Leo slash the German Shepherd is happy to take care of that role for you. So this can be a little bit. This one is a bit of a difficult position, not only because Saturn is out of its element here, but also because Saturn in general brings troubles and difficulties and stuff like this. So to have troubles and difficulties in a troubled and difficult position can then sort of like bring some difficulty. And then we're also looking at Saturn in a fire sign can be a little bit sort of impatient sometimes, and you know, Leo, it really expects a lot of like adoration and external love and this kind of thing. And so when that's not happening, then Saturn can be a little bit heavy-handed with needing that sort of stuff, and the difficulty that kind of comes with that. So moving on here, we've got Jupiter in Virgo next. So Jupiter is in exile in Virgo. So Jupiter rules Pisces, which is opposite to Virgo. So what we have here is Jupiter as far away from home as possible. So this is a position which sometimes can get carried away about the little things. You know, Virgo has a reputation for being a little bit neurotic, for like having a little bit like much as far as you know, there can be a lot of just like a lot of stuff going on sometimes, and it can be you know, so Jupiter tends to think big about stuff, but when Jupiter's in Virgo, it kind of like loses the forest because it gets so excited about a tree, you know, and so it can be very detail oriented in the way that Virgo is, but um, we're really sort of like looking at the kind of the mm, you know, it's very studious. Jupiter is very good for like teaching and learning and growth and these kinds of things, right? So Jupiter is still a benefic here. So even Jupiter, who is like out of place or something like this, is still going to be Jupiter, still trying to help most of the time. I really like that the idea, like Hermione is a good example here of Jupiter and Virgo. You know, she like knows the answer, and like kind of annoys the shit out of everybody by knowing the answer. You know, like her studiousness is her flaw. You know, and that's a little bit the sort of thing that we see with Jupiter and Virgo. Jupiter and Virgo is really good at studying and getting things organized and stuff like this, and it's just like chill sometimes. You know, doing the most is you'll hear me a lot talking about Jupiter and doing the most, and so that's a little bit of what we see here with Jupiter and Virgo. Of course, Virgo. So Virgo is ruled by Mercury, right? And so what we're always going to have to do is we're going to have to take a look at the position of Mercury. Is Mercury in a supportive position relative to this, or is Mercury in a position which is maybe Mercury is like combust the sun or something like this? And so that is going to be more difficult on that Jupiter relative to a super well positioned, you know, like maybe we've got Mercury here in Virgo as well. And so in that case, we're going to be in a much better position, right? And so we're always going to want to look at the condition of the ruling planet, because that's going to have a lot to say about how this planet operates. Saturn in Virgo. So again, we're looking at Virgo. We're looking at the details. We're looking at the organization component and these kinds of things. Saturn is very good at being reliable. Saturn is very good at sort of you know, making sure that all the things are in their spot, that things are ordered, or you know, all this kind of stuff. I really like thinking of Saturn in Virgo as the librarian, the one who like, you know, the librarian cares if you are quiet, in because that's one of the rules of the library. Be quiet in there and make sure to put the books in the right place. And if you can't put the books in the right place, I'll do it. Just put the books in this pile and I'll take care of it. Like all these kinds of things. You know, Saturn in Virgo is a little bit feels a little bit to me like you if you can't, like, you can't trust other people to get the job done right, you know. And so I'll just do it, you know. There's a, you know, we've got this neurosis which is sometimes associated with Virgo, but also we've got something here where Saturn is like, you know, Saturn is so very resolute, and this is Saturn in an Earth sign, right? Saturn's job is to be resolute and to be sturdy and stable and these kinds of things, and so to put Saturn into an Earth sign is a fairly comfortable position, whether or not we're sort of you know, whether or not there's we're looking at a lot of sort of essential dignity here. So Saturn in Virgo, you know, again, we're going to want to look at Mercury and what's going on with Mercury. But in general, This is a very practical Saturn sign, which is good for sort of like handling the little bits. This feels very, this is really good for fact checking. Saturn in Virgo is likely has fact checked this before and is willing to take another look at it. So, if you'll hold on for me just a minute. Perfect. Thank you for waiting. All right. Now then, here we go. All right. So, continuing on here, we've got Jupiter in Libra next. Jupiter in Libra Jupiter is often associated with truth or justice or these kinds of things. Judges are often associated with Jove, with Jupiter. I actually think the word judge is Jupiterian in origin. So that and Libra is the sign which is associated with fairness or balance or justice or these kinds of things. It's the scales, right? So we're always sort of like striving toward that balance or that harmony in Libra. Libra is a sign which is ruled by Venus. Venus cares a lot about accord or agreement or harmony and these kinds of things. So Libra is a sign which is, because of the scales, we can think about how it doesn't want to do just the one side. It feels really unbalanced, right? And so is always reaching out to the other side so that we can have both sides well represented, so it can be well-rounded, and so we can sort of like talk about agreement and things of this nature. So Jupiter is pretty good in this position. It doesn't have like a whole lot of essential dignity or anything like that, but we can definitely see a strong commitment to fairness or justice or righteousness here in some kind of way. Um, there's a strong commitment to truth and the a sense of like what is right here. We might see something here like a bleeding heart or something like this, because also with Venus rulership, then there's definitely something here that has to do with feelings. The way that it feels is very important to Venus, and so we'll want to look at the condition of Venus in order to assess the condition of Jupiter in Libra. But we can just sort of think about how Venus is in general and how Venus wants to engage with feelings and emotions and how it feels to be related to the other in some kind of way. And so this is a really, this is a position which can be subject to the feelings and interacting with things in a feelingsy kind of way, which can, that can be a little bit, sometimes that can be a bit of a trouble for Jupiter and Libra. But this is also likely to be a little bit on the sort of intuitive or listening side of things. If it cares so deeply about truth, then there's something here to sort of like hear about it. Libra also in general is one of the ones that is happy to sort of like listen to the other one and hear what's going on with the other one. And so this can be a bit of a nice position for Jupiter in that way, because Jupiter can be a little bit overbearing or doing the most sometimes. And so Libra is going to sort of like, make that space for another to say something. Saturn in Libra. So finally, we get to talk about Saturn in a sign that he likes, right? We've been sort of in rough positions with Saturn for a little while here, but Saturn in Libra is exalted. Saturn does really well in this position. Part of the reason for that is Libra cares so much about justice and fairness and stuff, and Saturn is willing to evaluate that in a really rigorous way. We can see Saturn in Libra as being really good with contracts or agreements or promises, really good at keeping promises. There's a reliability, a solidity, a foundation here. There's also, Saturn is often associated with consequences and things that happen after the fact in some kind of way. And so, when it's all said and done, when the dust has settled, then Saturn, is going to make sure that justice is done. And so in some ways, I kind of can like an exalted position a little better than in domicile. Domicile can sometimes lead or tend toward excess. So it can be a little too much of whatever that planet is doing. Saturn, and too much Saturn is always a problem for people, right? But Saturn in Libra is exalted, and so there's this like Venusian character here. Venus really wants to talk about accord, agreement, harmony, togetherness, and Saturn, if Saturn is just going to do Saturn things, then it feels a little hermity, right? It feels pretty like I don't like any of you, so stay away from me, stay off my lawn, like these kinds of things. Saturn in Libra has that Venusian touch, so really cares about the other and cares about harmony and agreement and these kinds of things. And so Saturn is not going to like let go its commitment to justice or to what is right or right, like it's not going to let go of its commitment to its sort of like moral or ethical superiority, but it also doesn't need to be super tough about it. It's willing to sort of grant that the world is full of people and full of perspectives, and that these can need listening to or engagement in some kind of way. So Saturn in Libra is really great for engaging with contracts and agreements, especially. Saturn in Libra is so good with promises kept. Moving on, so we've got Jupiter and Scorpio next. So Jupiter and Scorpio, I actually like this position a lot. I like Scorpio more than average, I'd say. No surprise there. But Jupiter and Scorpio is pretty. So there's a poison into medicine component here. So Scorpios tends to be associated with things that are gross or stinky, or I like to think about compost. Sometimes it's associated with death or dead things or rotten things or these kinds of, Scorpio is always associated with intensity. There's sometimes emotional intensity to be associated here. And so it tends to be thought of as a fairly difficult area of the zodiac. No one is exalted here, and only Mars, who is a malefic, rules it. And so there's a sense of this as being sort of an area of sky that's kind of gross or difficult, and people don't like it as much, or planets don't like it as much. But Jupiter in this position has a really nice ability to change whatever is gross, whatever is disgusting, whatever is poisonous or venomous, and change that into medicine and make it something that is valuable or helpful in some kind of way. We can think about, how often the cure is inherent in the problem some way. This is very well evidenced by the snake venom, for example, right? A small amount of the venom is the antidote to the venom. And so there's something here about sort of like going into the problem and finding the solution to the problem inherent inside it. The Scorpio is not afraid to sort of like look into difficulty or look at darkness or things that are maybe macabre or gross or something like this. And Jupiter in this position is going to go into that and sort of like be like, well, actually, this is pretty. There's something here, and we can. It's a little bit gross here, but with not very much, then we can turn this compost into really rich soil, and wouldn't that be super great? And so Jupiter in Scorpio is very good at finding the value in the like grossness or the muck or something like this. Saturn in Scorpio, on the other hand, Saturn in Scorpio is a malefic and a malefic sign. And so, there's something here that is a little bit, it can be a little on the rougher side of things. We might see something like ethical ambiguity here, right? So, like Saturn in Scorpio is willing to, be in the muck the same way that Jupiter in Scorpio is, but then might use it toward challenging or maleficent ends in some kind of way. We can also think about Saturn as being associated with fear sometimes, and Scorpios is a sign that can be sometimes associated with fear, or it can be thought of as being sort of threat sensitive or something like this. And so Saturn in Scorpio cares a lot about making sure that the locks work, making sure that safety and security is a real thing, that it's all possible. Saturn cares very much about this. And so we're back into a fixed sign here. So Saturn in a fixed sign can be a little bit rigid about things, right? And that, or unforgiving, perhaps. There's a kind of severity here that I think is really worth sort of engaging with in some kind of way. I do like Scorpio as a placement in general, but and this is it's very resolute. Saturn in Scorpio is very resolute. Thinks what it thinks and is not trying to change its mind necessarily, which can be really like that can be firm and stable and reliable and that sort of stuff. It can also be stubborn, it likely both. So moving on to Jupiter in Sagittarius. So Jupiter rules Sagittarius and so is in domicile here. So I mentioned that domicile can sometimes lead to excess, planets in excess. Planets in domicile can be a little bit excessive in the way they get down. Jupiter in Sagittarius is no different. Jupiter in Sagittarius might be very zealous, or one time I did some a Jupiter ritual while Jupiter was in Sagittarius a couple years ago, and I like did this whole situation and all this, and then as soon as I finished, a Jehovah's Witness came to the door, and I just thought it was like the best thing. Jupiter in Sagittarius is really excited about the good news, it like I have found the answer, or the news has been revealed to me, and now it's my job to go and tell it on the mountain. I have to go and tell the whole world. There can be something a little bit like evangelical about Jupiter in Sagittarius. One of the medieval texts associates Jupiter with Byzantine Christians, which are basically like Jehovah's Witnesses. They're super they're super excited about what they know to be true. Their religious truth is the truth, and they all they have to do is like get everybody in the world on board with it. And so we see a lot of this kind of feeling with Jupiter and Sagittarius. There's also, but it's not just about the religion or these kinds of things, right? There's a positivity and an optimism that can show up with Jupiter and Sagittarius as well. We can see some globe trotting that wants to happen with this kind of placement. Somebody who has Jupiter and Sagittarius is likely to sort of move around and be excited about stuff and try the stuff and eat the weird food and all these kinds of things. Like there's a sense of like, it'll be all right, we got this. Like there's a the optimism is very strong with Jupiter and Sagittarius. So this is like Jupiter with Jupiter sauce on it. This is like straight ahead Jupiter stuff. Saturn in Sagittarius is, so we're thinking about, so like globetrotters or these kinds of things, we're thinking about disparate locations. Saturn is good for building the thing that connects these disparate locations. And so we can see Saturn and Sagittarius building bridges a lot of times. And so there's something which, Saturn is the structure, but then we're looking at different places or foreign places to each other. Also concerned with the structure of the heavens, right? And so we can see something here about like figuring out the sort of like right way to live, or the right way to engage in spiritual practice or religious practice or something like that. Again, we can get into some of the zeal of Sagittarius and see some of the rigidness of Saturn, and kind of see how there's a little bit of they can sort of like just they can generate a feeling of like rightness around whatever the belief situation is. The zealot is strong. Sagittarius positions can look very zealous for sure, and Saturn is this way as well. Saturn sort of like moves toward rigidness by his nature. So then, Jupiter in Capricorn. Jupiter in Capricorn, this is a position which is sometimes called fall. If we think about fall, then this is like fallen down or down in a ditch, lower. This is the opposite of exaltation. Exaltation was raised up. Fall is like down, having an extra difficult time with things. And so the, Jupiter's job is to build or to make things bigger or something like this. But in Capricorn, which is a sign that's ruled by Saturn, then we're going to use Saturn's tools to do Jupiter's job. Saturn's tools typically refer to restriction or constriction or doing less or saying no to things in some kind of way. Now, this is a position that Jupiter doesn't like very much. Jupiter would prefer to say yes to things. Jupiter would prefer abundance, growth, rather than the kind of melancholy or restriction that Saturn tends to offer. The way that I like to think about this a lot of times is sort of it. It can be MacGyvery. It takes whatever is possible, whatever's around, and then makes something possible out of it. Or generates possibility out of a rough situation. We can think about a diamond in the rough here, or I think thrift is a really good way. Thrift or clever is a really good way to. And so I googled the word clever and found this image, and I really like it. There's this kind of we can see a nighttime scene here where they're trying some new things and maybe haven't seen it or thought about it in this way before. Jupiter in Capricorn is going to have to find some workarounds a lot of times. The way that I was delineating Jupiter in Capricorn last year was we had a really sort of like iconoclastic year last year, and so a lot of the sort of structures that we had come to count on came crumbling down. And but then Jupiter in Capricorn was like, well, shit, these are some really nice cinder blocks that we can use, and we can still build stuff with this. We've got some good stuff here, and we have some blocks that we wouldn't have had these structures not come down. So actually, it might be all right. This is Jupiter's way. Jupiter's way is to like point toward optimism or positivity or growth or the good stuff whenever possible. And so even though Jupiter in Capricorn isn't super empowered to do that, it is empowered with thrift and an ability to kind of look at less than ideal circumstances and make something delicious out of it anyway. Saturn in Capricorn, of course, is in domicile here. So this is Saturn that is really great at doing Saturn stuff. This is going to be really strongly disciplined. This is going to be a little bit chilly sometimes, very tough. But like we might be seeing things like tough love here, or Saturn. This is Saturn with Saturn sauce on there, right? So we're looking at doing the most Saturn things. We're looking at like isolation might be something that we see here sometimes, or loneliness of some sort, or this gets into the hermity, like I can't stand all these people or something like this. This tends to be a little bit on the sort of slower moving side of things because of the so much Saturn influence. But this is also a position which gets really strong, especially as it matures or ages. Saturn gets better with age no matter what. But somebody who has Saturn in Capricorn or Saturn in a Saturn sign is going to sort of like really, this person does well in older age or in maturity than someone who doesn't. When I did a podcast on the Astrology podcast with Palace, who's also known as Nine of Wands on Instagram, and Palace said of my cohort of Saturn and Capricorn, I have Saturn and Capricorn, that we are very severe, and I really just love that term for Saturn and Capricorn. Like this is our sort of nocturnal Saturn, and so we're in this is. If we're looking at nocturnal, then this is Saturn in a night chart, and it's rough, right? This is more rough than Saturn in a day chart would be, right? And so this is a position which, has the really rough edges. You just like deal with that shit. It's there's a kind of grit here, which is super tough, and that has to engage with difficulty and like there's a sense of dealing with difficulty and like that's just what we have to do here, and I don't have time for you if you don't if you don't do difficulty well, or if you don't know how to deal with toughness. I think that this may be evident in the way that I talked about Saturn in Cancer, right? I talked about it as sort of like lacking a backbone or something like this, right? Which I think is kind of true. But I'm a Saturn in Capricorn native, right? And so I sort of resonate with a tough backbone. And if you don't like handle your business and be disciplined and all these kind of things, then like what's the comeuppance around that? What are the consequences of that? That's what Saturn wants to talk about, right? Whereas Saturn in Cancer wants to be a little maybe softer and needs a hug or two or something of this nature. So Saturn in Capricorn, very strong Saturn position, and maybe a little on the grumpy side of things from time to time. So Capricorn and Aquarius are two Saturn signs which are back to back. And so Jupiter in Aquarius is another Jupiter in a Saturn sign. Now this time it's not opposite from its exaltation, and so this is not Jupiter in fall. This is just Jupiter in a Saturn sign. This is going to be a little bit more effective at doing Jupiter things. Jupiter in Aquarius is very thoughtful. There's when I often think of Jupiter in Aquarius as being unorthodox in some kind of way, or being like thinking of itself as being on the cutting edge or something like that. And that often sort of like it feels like a commitment to truth. Aquarius is very committed to what it does and to its ideals and to its values and things of this nature. And Aquarius is usually thought of as being sort of like on the outside of some sort. And so Jupiter has like maybe religious or spiritual concerns, which are the matter a lot to Jupiter. But then in Aquarius, then it might be something that's a little bit weird or maybe a little bit outside of the norm. And then there's this sense that Jupiter and Aquarius will often have of being like, yes, I understand that it's weird, but it's also true. And it's very true, and I'm not going to give that up. And so this is a lot of what Jupiter will sort of bring about in Aquarius. There's something here that is very thoughtful. It's very idea oriented. Jupiter in Aquarius has some really good ideas and is very committed to them. Saturn in Aquarius. So I mentioned that this is Saturn in domicile. This is Saturn in a Saturn sign. So again, we're looking at all of the same Saturn, toughness or maybe isolation or something of this nature, getting better with age, these kinds of things. But often what we'll see with Saturn in Aquarius is like systems management of some sort. So, we're in Aquarius, we've got a lot of ideals and ideas, right? And kind of big picture ideas a lot of times. And so Saturn is going to be very much about managing or ordering those kinds of ideals. We can take the unorthodoxy of Aquarius and sort of make it into a system that can be managed. And then this way we can turn these ideals into the orthodoxy of the future. This can be a little, there can be something that is a little bit detached or chilly around this kind of placement. But that sort of detached perspective can be really good for managing systems and taking a look at all of the stuff that happens and that needs sort of ordering or putting things together, generating the network. So then, moving right along here, we have Jupiter in Pisces. Ooh, we are going over time. So Jupiter in Pisces is in domicile. This is Jupiter in a Jupiter sign. This is all of the Jupiter just being hella Jupiter out here. We can see oceanic kind of bounty here. This tarot card, which ultimately hails from the Rider-Waite-Smith card, is again shows a Jupiter in Pisces. This is like, so this card, I like to think of this card because this guy is fat and happy. You know, there's plenty of, there are 9 cups. He's got plenty of abundance. Cups being associated with emotional stuff, or like, you know, the sort of oceanic bounty. There's a lot of water here, and dude is looking just fine about it in this image, right? And so this kind of bigness is a real big deal for how we work with Jupiter and Pisces. There's a, you know, there, we can see all of the sort of spiritual stuff coming up here as well, and kind of like running into, you know, the Pisces is very, you know, good at engaging with how like the universal oneness of it all. Like it's all the one stuff. It's all kind of in a soup together. And so we're really, Jupiter in this position is very good at sort of like managing or putting together under the one umbrella, and sort of getting a kind of wisdom and clarity about the bigness of it. Really likes to dive into that and has a lot of fun doing it. Jupiter in Pisces is, this is a nice position. Again, we're looking at Jupiter in domicile here, so this might turn into excess of some sort. There might be like doing the most, or we might lean in on confusion sometimes. Overwhelm is something that Pisces often struggles with. Jupiter tends to make things bigger, and so can definitely show some overwhelm in a person's life or in a person's chart. But like this is a position that's going to want to tend to make things better or be exciting in some kind of way. Saturn in Pisces, on the other hand, is you know, so this is Saturn in a Jupiter sign. So we're going to want to be concerned with the Jupiter stuff, with the spirituality or the kind of bigness of the world and these kinds of things. But when we think about the ocean, then we might start thinking about how the bottom of the ocean is damn near outer space, right? Things get really weird, and it's really dark, and there's just like there's all this weight to it, right? At the bottom of the ocean, there's all this water that sort of like is sitting on top of it already, right? And so there's this depth and sort of like difficulty that might be associated with that. There's a heavyweight kind of sense here. And so the Saturn in Pisces is unafraid of the dark, for sure, is ready to like go down into the depths of things, but also might have a little bit of that depth that it kind of carries around with it. And so might be a little bit on the dark and dreamy side of things, kind of like on the daily as well. So Jupiter in Aries is hype. This is Jupiter in a fire sign. Jupiter likes the fire signs. This is Jupiter, like get ready to get it started out here. Let's get it crunk. I looked up Lil Jon's information. Lil Jon actually has Jupiter in Sagittarius, but it's not about Lil Jon necessarily. It's more about to the window. Like this kind of like, oh shit, it's about to go down is kind of how Jupiter feels about it, right? Ready to get the thing started. Aries is often associated with them. I like to think about matches, right? You strike the match and it gets things going here. And Jupiter and Aries, we might think about like one of these like really big fireplace matches. You know what I mean? And like there's like a conflagration here for a minute. It's still Aries, right? So it's still only for the 1 minute. It's good for initiating things, and it's sometimes a little bit lacking on follow through. But this can still be a very exciting placement where a lot of stuff can kind of go down or be excited about it. We can also a lot of times see like the ideas which are concise here. You know, Aries is very straight to the point, doesn't really want to do a lot of pussyfooting, doesn't really want to do you know, like it can sometimes get bored with stuff if it's not in the, you know, like easily digestible format. And so Jupiter is going to be really good at sort of making things understandable, comprehensible, you know, like the teaching component, but like do it in kind of a meme format. So it's really like a small digestible piece of information. Saturn in Aries on the other hand here, so Saturn does not like being in Aries. Aries is opposite to Libra, which is the exaltation of Saturn. And so this is Saturn in fall or in its depression. This is Saturn. This is a Saturn that has a real rough time with stuff. This can be impatient. Saturn is associated with long time periods and delays and these kinds of things. But Aries wants to start, go, 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 go right now. And so this can become like a little bit, impatient. This can become ragey if things don't happen on a certain time scale. People really, this looks like being impatient with the pace of change of some kind, or something like this. We also might sort of see some aggravation around authority figures or these kinds of things. And so there's a kind of stubbornness that can show up here as well. And so this is one of these positions that can be troublesome for people, especially once we get into Saturn times. If somebody is like doing a Saturn return in Aries or something like that, that can be a little bit more difficult than Saturn returning into Libra or something like this. Saturn in Aries, the Saturn return tends to be a time which is associated with challenge or difficulty or discipline or coming to maturity or something like this. And it's a time period, it's a phase. It takes 2.5 or 3 years to go through all this. And Saturn in Aries is really just going to have trouble with engaging on that kind of time scale. Are we there yet? Come on. So yeah, that's kind of what we see here with Saturn in Aries. Jupiter in Taurus, so this is Jupiter in a Venus sign. This permaculture is what I was really thinking about here. Taurus is the fixed earth sign. It's the sign that has the most to do with with the earth or the land itself. A lot of times we see things like plowing fields or any of that sort of stuff. And so Jupiter in Taurus is really good. It has a nice green thumb, especially if Venus is in good condition, right? So if Venus is in whack position, the classic example is besieged by malefics or something like this, then this can be more difficult. But by and large, if Venus is in middling to good condition, then Jupiter is going to do well in Taurus. There's no particular essential dignity to get excited about here, but it is a benefic and a benefic sign. Some of the Jupiter stuff is going to have a little more of the staying power in this sign. This is Jupiter in a fixed sign, and so it's going to have a little more of that resilience. So we're going to be looking at things that are a little bit more permanent, or that there's the stuff that wants to sort of root and become really thick. And so I feel like big trees are a good way to sort of think about that. With Jupiter in Taurus, there's a kind of patience here also with Jupiter in Taurus that that Jupiter is not typically associated with, but Taurus is a nice slow moving sign that I feel like Jupiter kind of benefits from. This is I like Jupiter in Taurus. This isn't one of the ones that in the text you'll see a lot of big excitement around. It's not the way that people talk really big about Jupiter in Pisces or something like this. But Jupiter in Taurus there's a kind of solidity here, and with Jupiter in Taurus, there's a solidity and a not just solid but also comfortable. It doesn't the thing doesn't move, and that's exactly what you want from this thing. Moving on to Saturn in Taurus. So Saturn in Taurus is very deliberate. It's very steadfast, unhurried, sturdy, unmoving. These are all the kind of variations on a theme here. I like the oxen as or the beasts of burden. The beasts themselves are very heavyweight, and they move heavyweight equipment in order to plow the land. This is just all of our significations kind of stacked up here. You know, we can think about, you know, Saturn is very slow moving. This is Saturn in a fixed sign. So I've mentioned a few times how that can be a little bit stubborn sometimes. And Taurus has this reputation for being stubborn as well, right? And so there's something here that is a little bit, you know, try to move an ox who doesn't want to move, right? Like it's damn near impossible to do that. But there is something really reliable about that kind of presence as well. And so there's, you know, it's very sturdy. It's very, you know, this is an unmoving kind of placement. And so if you're looking for reliability, then Saturn in Taurus is definitely your move. Jupiter in Gemini is, so now we're looking at, so Gemini is ruled by Mercury. The Mercury signs are exiled for Jupiter, right? So Jupiter rules Sagittarius, which is opposite to Gemini. So Jupiter is now as far from home as possible in Gemini. One of the things that we see with Gemini is a kind of buzzy back and forth, like doing all the different things kind of situation. And Jupiter in Gemini kind of like, what can happen in this position is we can sort of see the jack of all trades, but the master of none. Someone who is multi-talented, who has a lot of ability and a lot of different things that they are capable of doing, but perhaps a difficulty deciding which one is the right thing to do, or a difficulty integrating all the different talents into the one piece that goes really well. Sometimes Jupiter and Gemini can get a little bit distracted. It can maybe have difficulty getting stuff done, or even beginning sometimes, just because of the paralysis that can come from having all of the different things that are possible and all of the different things that it wants to do, but maybe has trouble getting everything together in order to get it done. This is a very thinky kind of placement as well, you know, with Jupiter being associated with the spirituality, or the kind of interior domain in that way, and then Gemini being associated with words and all these kinds of things. You know, Jupiter in Gemini has a lot of words a lot of times, and you know, like, you know, just like a lot. There's a lot with Jupiter and Gemini. I have this placement, and like thinking in words is like such a very important part of the way that I sort of like think about this placement. And finally, we have arrived at Saturn in Gemini. So, you know, Gemini is talking about it. Gemini is communicative, especially like you always got to look at the placement of Mercury, right? How is Mercury doing? What kind of condition is Mercury in order to get to what Saturn in Gemini would do? Saturn in Gemini is definitely down to debate a topic. Saturn is the one who sort of has, you know, Saturn is wanting to talk about restrictions or rules or regulations, or like what does the text say? You know, is there some way that we can verify or something like this? And Gemini is going to be the one who wants to talk about it and talk around it, circumlocute and dig all the different ways around it and all these kinds of things. And so we can see, you know, like there's an argumentative kind of way of approaching things that Saturn and Gemini can kind of take sometimes. Now, this is really good if you're going to be trying to make an argument or make a point of some sort, right? Saturn and Gemini is very eloquent when it comes to making its point. Although it can also get into gossip from time to time. And, you know, that Gemini is this way. Gemini has a lot of words, has a lot to say about stuff. And so there's, you know, Saturn in Gemini is going to, you know, if we can think about Saturn as like bad words, we can think about Saturn as bad or difficult or challenging or something like this, malefic, evildoer, right? And then put it in Gemini, and then like, are there bad words around, or there and are Mercury is associated with arguments and wrestling in many of the traditional texts as well. And so here we can definitely see something about like this kind of like it can, you know, Gemini has a lot of words, but Saturn here can maybe cause a problem of some sort, or cause problems around words. That's a totally possible one as well. And so there we have it. We made it. We made it through all 12 signs with these planets. There is, there's so much to think about when like assessing the condition of any planet, and sort of like trying to get to a narrative arc around what this planet is doing in this chart. And so planet in one sign is that's a nice place to begin, and it's a really good way. So basically what you're going to want to do in order to figure it out in that capacity is you're going to want to be like, okay, well, how is this planet, Jupiter or Saturn, and how well does it get along with the ruler of this sign? So Jupiter and the moon, for example, get along really well. They have similar ideals and similar things that they want. So Jupiter in the sign of the moon is like, we like that one, right? There's an agreement here. Or we can take a look at Saturn and put Saturn into a Mars sign and be like, well, this looks a little like Saturn wants to stop or say no to things, but Mars wants to push, and so there's conflict here, or something like this, right? This is a good way to sort of so you don't even necessarily have to memorize the essential dignity scheme. It can be helpful to remember that Saturn in Aries is in fall and that Jupiter in Cancer is in exaltation or whatever, right? It can be helpful to remember these things, but really a good way to kind of arrive at this is to look at the planet in question and its relationship to the planet who rules that sign. And so we can think about that relationship as like its inherent relationship. Jupiter and the moon get along very well, but then we can also look at the relationship in the chart. Are they making aspect to each other, and these kinds of things as well? And this is all going to be really important when we're looking at how to assess the condition of a planet in the chart, such as Jupiter or Saturn. So that's what I have to say about the Daytime Squad. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today, and I hope this has been helpful for you. Thank you so much to Stormie Grace and the whole YouTube Academy. I'm blessed and fortunate to be a part of that. Thank you so much for being here with me today, and I look forward to seeing y'all next time. Bye.